My name is Danny, and I'm 22 years old. What I'm about to tell you is, without a doubt, the most terrifying experience of my life. Living and working in New York City, I rely on the subway to get around. I don't own a car, so taking the train at night is nothing new for me. It was a Saturday, and I had just left a party, heading home well past midnight. The subway station was nearly deserted, something that never really bothered me before. But that night was different. As I made my way down the tight, enclosed stairwell, a strange sense of unease settled over me. It felt like I was being watched. The underground was eerily silent, aside from the occasional distant clang of metal against concrete, sounds with no clear source. I told myself I was just overthinking it. I took a seat on a bench, waiting for my train, but then a voice. "Hey, over here, buddy." It was coming from the tracks. My blood ran cold as I turned to look. There, peeking out from the dark tunnel, was a man. He was filthy, his clothes tattered, his face smeared with grime. He looked to be in his early 40s, but his expression is what disturbed me the most. He was grinning, a horrible, yellow-toothed smile with several teeth missing. Even from where I sat, I could see the decay. I averted my eyes, pretending not to notice. But then another voice joined in, low, raspy laughter echoing from the tunnel. A second man appeared. He looked just as filthy as the first, his eyes hollow, his grin just as unsettling. "Come hang out with us," he taunted. I kept my gaze fixed ahead, but I could feel their eyes locked onto me. They weren't blinking. They weren't moving, just watching. My heart pounded in my chest as I willed the train to come faster. Then something shifted. One of them retreated into the tunnel, only to return moments later with someone else. I forced myself to glance over, and that's when I saw it. A third face, but this one was different. It wasn't moving. It wasn't reacting. It was slumped, lifeless. One of the men was holding it up, as if to show me. I felt sick. My body tensed, my mind screaming at me to run. But just as panic threatened to overtake me, the train arrived. Relief flooded through me as I shot up and hurried toward the platform edge, desperate to escape. But just as I stepped forward, my stomach lurched. In the dim glow of the tunnel lights, I saw it. The second man, the one at the back, was holding something. A head, a severed human head. I stumbled back, choking on my own breath. The two men retreated into the tunnel, their disturbing smiles the last thing I saw before they disappeared into the darkness. I didn't think. I just ran onto the train, heading straight for the conductor's cabin. I pounded on the door, my panic taking over. "It's an emergency!" I shouted. The door cracked open, and I barely let the conductor speak before I launched into what I had just seen. His face paled as he reached for his radio, alerting someone higher up. I didn't know what happened after that. I didn't want to know. All I could focus on was getting home, putting as much distance between myself and that station as possible. When my stop finally came, I could hardly contain my relief. I practically leaped off the train, forcing myself to walk at a normal pace despite every fiber of my being screaming at me to run. Since that night, I've been back to my friend's place for another party, but I refuse to use that station. I don't care how far out of the way it is. I will never step foot there again, because now I know the truth. There are things lurking in the tunnels of the New York City subway, and some of them are watching. It was around Christmas time when my friends and I found ourselves wandering through New York City late into the night. The city was still buzzing with holiday lights, but by the time we finally decided to head home, it was past 2 a.m. We caught the first train we could, and as expected, it was nearly empty. We had sobered up by then, just chatting and passing the time, when suddenly we heard a commotion in the next car. Peering through the glass door between the train cars, we saw two hooded figures standing uncomfortably close to a woman seated by herself. She was panicked, screaming for help. I immediately turned to my friends. "We should go over there and stop them," I said. But as my buddy and I stepped closer, we noticed something that made our blood run cold. Both men were armed. Their hands gripped small handguns, barely concealed in their jackets. Without hesitation, I shoved my friends toward the next car, whispering for them to move fast. As we pushed through the doors, I made a quick glance back, And that's when I saw it. One of the men had spotted us. He pointed in our direction, and without a word, they started following. Our group bolted, rushing through car after car. The train felt endless as we ran, desperate to put as much distance between us and them as possible. Finally, the train screeched to a stop at the next station, and we didn't hesitate. We sprinted off, dashing through the old, dimly lit station, searching for anywhere to hide. In the chaos, I got separated from my friends. My heart pounded as I searched for cover, finally ducking behind a large garbage can. My breath was shallow, my hands shaking as I listened. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the tiled floors. They were close, peeking through a small opening near the top of the bin. I finally got a good look at them. One was black, the other South Asian, both young, too young to be this dangerous. My mind raced, still trying to process what was happening, when I heard something that made my stomach drop. If you find them, kill them. My body tensed. My breath hitched. I nearly gave myself away with a gasp. I had assumed they were just thieves looking to mug us. But this was something else entirely. I forced myself to stay still as they passed. They didn't have their guns drawn at that moment. Maybe they thought we were long gone. But as soon as they moved farther down the station, I seized my chance. I ran. Up ahead, my friends were waving me over from behind a large pole. I dove into cover with them, panting, barely able to process what had just happened. We stayed there for what felt like forever, waiting, hoping they wouldn't come back. But the real shock came when we saw her, the woman from the train. She wasn't a victim after all. She walked over to the two men, looking irritated. "Where are they?" She snapped. "Don't tell me you let them get away." My stomach twisted as the realization set in. It was a trap. The two men reappeared from behind a corner, walking up to her. They spoke too softly for us to hear, but their body language was clear. They were frustrated, angry that we had slipped away. Then, without another word, they turned and headed back down the stairs toward the platforms, waiting for the next train, waiting for new prey. At the very least, we called the police, reporting everything we saw. But whether they were ever caught or not, I'll never know. My dad has spent 35 years working as an MTA transit subway station manager. His job requires a manager to be present at all times, meaning he has covered every shift imaginable, including countless late-night shifts. While he enjoyed the eerie calm of nearly empty trains, one night, that solitude became terrifying. It was around 3 a.m. when my dad boarded a train to transfer to another station. He was alone at first, but at the next stop, a man stepped inside. My dad described him as tall, thin, and pale, bundled up in a heavy jacket and a beanie. The man barely acknowledged my dad at first, stealing only a quick glance before taking the farthest seat from him. But as the train moved, my dad couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few moments, the man would lift his head and stare at him. When my dad's stop arrived, he got up, and so did the stranger. He hurried to his office, unlocking the door while glancing back. The man lingered about 50 feet away, pacing back and forth. My dad stepped inside, locked the door, and sat at his desk, his heart pounding. Minutes later, the doorknob rattled. Someone was testing the lock. Then came a soft knocking. "Who is it?" My dad called out. A voice on the other side responded, "I just want to talk." My dad had spent years in the subway system. He knew trouble when he saw it. He told the man to leave, but the knocking continued for several more minutes. Finally, he checked the security cameras. As soon as he pulled up the feed, his stomach dropped. There, directly outside his office door, stood the man from the train. As if he knew he was being watched, the man suddenly turned and walked away. My dad tried to shake it off and focused on his work for the next half hour. But when it was time to leave, he checked the cameras again, making sure the man was truly gone. The coast was clear. He locked up and hurried down the stairs to the platform. The train arrived and he stepped inside. But just as the doors were about to close, he saw movement. The man had returned. He entered the same car and sat a few seats away, eyes locked onto my dad. My dad tried to avoid eye contact, staring out the window. At one point, he forced a nervous smile and a nod, hoping to diffuse whatever tension there was. But the man never stopped staring. Why didn't my dad confront him? Because despite his broad, intimidating build, my dad has always been a gentleman, and deep down, he feared that one wrong move could turn deadly. When the train finally stopped, my dad didn't hesitate. He bolted up the stairs, glancing over his shoulder, and sure enough, the man was following. Desperate for safety, he darted into the first public building he could find, a Wendy's. He sat down, trying to catch his breath, but the nightmare wasn't over. The man appeared outside, pressing up against the glass, staring at my dad for a full 10 seconds before slowly walking away. Still rattled, my dad waited longer before finally leaving for his last stop of the night. But when he arrived at his final office and checked the security cameras out of paranoia, his blood ran cold. The man was there, pacing outside, no more than 30 feet from the office. Then, as if sensing the camera, he suddenly stopped, his gaze locking onto the lens. He stood there, frozen, for nearly a full minute before finally lowering his head and walking away. My dad never saw him again. He doesn't know if the man followed him beyond the Wendy's, but given how persistent he was, it wouldn't be surprising. Was he just a disturbed homeless man? A dangerous stalker? Someone with worse intentions? My dad will never know. But one thing is certain, he was lucky that night.